People ask me all the time whether Seiðr can be really practiced today. And I understand why they ask. I really do. We're not living in the world of the Volva. We're not standing in the same halls. We're not walking the roads, speaking the same communities, or carrying the same social roles. I cannot become the woman who sat in the high seat in the sagas. I cannot borrow her village, her language, her duties, her fears, her authority, or the exact world who knew what to do when she entered the room. And I'm not trying to. And that really matters to say out loud. There's a difference between honoring something and pretending to be something. There's a difference between reaching toward an older current and dressing yourself in someone else's skin. When I speak of Seiðr as a living practice, I am not saying that we can copy the past perfectly or fill every blank space with certainty. I am also not interested in inventing something wild and stamping the word ancient over the top of it. That is not the work. The work is deeper than that. For me, Seiðr begins with a question that's much bigger than reconstruction. What did they know about living in a world that answered back? Because Seiðr did not grow out of nowhere. It did not float into the north as a random set of magical tricks. It belonged to a worldview. It belonged to people who understood fate and family and memory and land, spirits, breath, sound, dream, grief, and luck as living forces. They lived in a world where the dead were not simply gone, where the land was not simply scenery, where words had weight, where a dream could matter, where a sign could turn the head, where a woman sitting apart from the crowd might be doing something the whole community needed. That is where I begin. I did not begin with costume, fantasy, or an argument to win. I began with the worldview. I began with the possibility that the world is more relational than modern life teaches us to believe. Life is woven, not isolated. A person is never just one private little creature moving through empty space. We carry ancestors and choices, luck, memory, obligation, grief, gifts, wounds, names, stories, and consequences. We move through a web that existed before us and will keep moving after us. That's not hard for me to believe. And honestly, it feels harder to believe the opposite. It feels harder to believe that we are sealed off from everything, and that the dead become nothing, and that the land is mute, and that our words do not shape us, that our choices vanish the moment we make them, that grief has no voice, that intuition is always nonsense, and the body never knows what the mind refuses to say. Seiðr to me begins in the refusal to flatten the world. It begins in listening. This is not about performing or proving yourself or even trying to sound impressive. It is listening to the thread beneath the moment, the way the room changes when a name is spoken, the dream that will not leave you alone, the grief that keeps showing up at the same door. It is listening to the land when it feels welcoming or watchful or done with your nonsense. It is listening to the body when it tightens and it softens and it heats or chills or remembers the mind has words for it. That's the place that I want to speak from. And I don't need to prove I'm an ancient Volva reborn, because I'm not. I am a modern woman with modern limits, modern tools, modern language, and modern responsibilities. I live here. I live now. But that doesn't mean the thread is broken. It means I have to be honest about where my hands are touching it. So then we ask the grounded question: what can we actually stand on? What do the sources and the stories and the surviving fragments actually give us? They give us women remembered for prophecy, trance, counsel, and spirit work. They give us high seats and songs, staffs and scenes, where a woman is called into a home because something needs to be seen or answered or interpreted or changed. And that tells us something. It tells us that Seiðr is not just magic in the hollow, shallow way that people use the word now. It was not simply a spell for personal gain, an aesthetic, or a vibe. It lived inside of a relationship with community, fate, spirits, the dead, the land, and the unseen pressures moving beneath just ordinary life. And that matters because if we pull Seiðr out of the worldview and turn it into a loose pile of techniques, then we lose the thing that makes Seiðr in the first place. And I think, honestly, this is where the modern people can get tangled. They may want to practice without the worldview, the mystery without the obligation, the old word without old understanding that every single act enters the web. And I don't say this to shame anyone. I say it because I think it protects the work. A spiritual practice without worldview becomes a decoration very quickly. It becomes whatever the practitioner wants it to be at that day or in that moment. And Seiðr cannot be held that way, at least not if we're trying to honor it with any kind of seriousness. The Norse world did not imagine the self as a sealed private island. A person was tied to kin, land, name, memory, luck, reputation, oath, ancestry, and consequence. Your actions did not simply belong to you. They moved outward. They touched the family, the hall. They touched the dead. They touched the future. That is the soil Seiðr grew from. So when I say I practice Seiðr now, I'm not trying and saying that I have recovered every missing ritual detail. I am saying that I am practicing from the worldview that made the work coherent. That means I care about the fate as a woven reality, not a fixed person. I care about ancestors as part of the living memory a person carries, not as a spooky decoration. I care about land as presence, not as background scenery. And I care about speech because words can bless, bind, reveal, wound, and restore. I care about trance because sometimes the ordinary mind is too loud to hear what's underneath. I care about counsel because seeing something means very little if it does not help someone live more honestly. That is the ground. That is what keeps this from becoming fantasy with a pretty name. And the goal is not to claim certainty where I do not have it. The goal is to build relationship where the old worldview still gives us a path. So what does that mean now? For me, it means Seiðr has to be practiced with roots and honesty. It means we do not get to pretend that every detail has survived. I do not get to fill the gaps carelessly and then call it devotion. I also do not believe that the only respectful answer is to leave the whole thing behind a glass, untouched and untouchable like a dead thing in a museum. That has never made sense to me. A tradition can be broken in the sources and still alive in the body of the people. A practice can be fragmentary and still meaningful. A path can be old without being perfectly preserved. But we have to be honest about the difference because that is where the real work begins. Modern Seiðr, at least the way I understand it and I practice it, begins with relationship. Relationship with the land under your feet. Relationship with the dead who stand behind you. Relationship with the gods and the spirits and the powers you approach. Relationship with your own body, because the body often knows when the mouth is trying to be polite. Relationship with fate, but not as something that you control like a machine, but something that you enter, touch, answer, and carry. And let's face it, that's not glamorous work all the time. Sometimes it's sitting quietly until your nervous system stops trying to perform spirituality. Sometimes it is learning how your body feels when something is true, when something is fear, when something is grief, when something is your own wish trying to dress itself up as a message. Sometimes it is tending to your ancestors, or feeding the land, keeping your word, paying attention to dreams, learning old stories, singing into your own chest until your voice stops feeling like a stranger. That is practice. And it's not always dramatic. And honestly, I trust it more because of that. Real spiritual work changes how you listen, how you speak, and how you choose, and how you carry responsibility, and how you repair what you have damaged. If a practice gives someone a sense of power, but never asks them to become more honest, more steady, and more accountable, or more careful with other people's lives, then I do not care how ancient the words sound. Something is wrong. Seiðr requires discernment. That word is not very flashy, but it may be one of the most important parts of this whole thing. Discernment is knowing that not every feeling is a sign. Not every dream is a prophecy. Not every chill down your spine is a spirit. Not every ancestor is wise. And not every message needs to be spoken. Not every door should be walked through. And that doesn't make the work less sacred. It makes it safer and cleaner. And it makes something that can actually hold weight. Because if we're going to speak about the unseen, we have to be careful with the seen. We have to be careful with real people and grief and fear and real longing, real trauma and real hope. Spiritual authority without humility can hurt people very quickly, and I do not want Seiðr used as a costume for ego. I want it to be treated as a discipline of listening, relationship, and responsibility. And that is why I come back to the worldview again and again and again. And I know some of you guys are very sick of it. You're like, yeah, worldview, but I cannot express how important it is. Because the worldview gives the practice its bones. And without it, Seiðr becomes whatever somebody wants it to be. And with it, the work has shape. It asks better questions of you. How do my actions enter the web? What am I carrying that began before me? What am I adding to the line? What does the land ask of me here? What kind of speech am I putting into the world? Am I seeking power, or am I learning how to serve what is sacred with steadier hands? Those questions matter. They are not decorative. They are the difference between playing with an old word and entering a serious relationship with an old current. So can Seiðr be practiced today? Yes. Not as a perfect copy of the past, not a fantasy where we're pretending the missing pieces are not missing. Not as a spiritual costume someone puts on to feel special. It can be practiced today as a relationship. It can be practiced as listening, trance, song, counsel, ancestor work, land work, dream work, careful study of the sources, and honest tending of the spirit. It can be practiced through willingness to sit on the edge of what is known and still behave with integrity. And that is where I stand. I stand in the present with one hand reaching toward the old worldview and one hand in the life in front of me, and both feet planted firmly in responsibility. I cannot become the Volva of the past. I can honor what her presence tells us. I can listen for the thread she knew was there. And I can teach others how to approach it without pretending, without flattening it out, without handing over discernment over to someone else. That, to me, is where Seiðr begins. It begins when we stop asking whether the past can be copied perfectly and start asking how a worldview this alive can still teach us to listen. The thread is not broken just because the world has changed. It's just waiting for honest hands. And that's where I'm going to leave this thread for today. So until next time, keep listening, because that world still answers. Talk to you again.